Controversial. Compelling. The Tommy Schnurmacher Show. Hear Tommy live weekdays 9 to noon on CJAD 800.
Canada. What an icky word. Many businesses in Quebec avoid using it at all costs in ads to avoid offending the delicate sensibilities of Quebec nationalists. Well, if they're a private business, that's their concern. Whatever they do is between themselves, their customers, and their shareholders. What the CBC and Reggio Canada do, however, is another story, and that's because they are funded by the taxpayer to the tune of more than $1 billion each and every single year. The French-language CBC, known as Reggio Canada for decades, has decided to change its name. They're getting rid of the word Reggio and the word Canada. Instead, the federally funded state broadcaster will be known in French by the name Ici. If they're honest, they'd call it là-bas, because the funding comes more from là-bas than it does from Ici. If they plan to banish the word Canada, then let them banish the funding from Canada. And when you think about it, it sounds like a good time, the perfect time to privatize the state broadcaster. Like they say on PBS, TV worth watching is TV worth paying for. The people who watch it can pay, and they can call it whatever they like. The CBC is supposed to promote Canadian identity, yet it routinely outbids private broadcasters with our tax money to air American movies and TV shows. Radio Canada hardly ever does programming about French communities outside Quebec in the rest of the country. The CBC, even according to its own devotees, is supposed to maintain Canadian unity. Removing the very word Canada hardly seems in keeping with said mandate. No reason why the CBC and Radio Canada should be government-operated and taxpayer-subsidized to promote a worldview not shared by most of the people picking up the tab. What do you think? Should they keep the name Radio Canada, or do you think it's high time to privatize the place? You can call 514-790-0991, or you can text your comment to 514-800. And here they are, the three fastest drivers at the Grand Prix: Abe Hefter, Anne Lagacé Dowson, and Trudy Mason. And we'll start with Anne.
Well, as some people may know, I spent at least 20 years working for the public broadcaster, not the state broadcaster. There's a big difference between those two things. It's funded by taxpayers, it's true, to the tune of about $31 per person per year, as compared to the BBC, which is funded at around $60 or $70 or even more dollars per person per year. So it's a relatively inexpensive public broadcaster. It's a crown corporation, so it's at arm's length with the government. And the fact of the matter is that no government ever really likes the CBC. The CBC does its job. It covers government, and it does a critical assessment of government, both conservative and liberal. And if you talk to liberals, they'll all tell you that they never liked the CBC. Jean Chrétien hated the CBC. So, I think $31 per person per year is a really good investment. We wouldn't have the Charbonneau Commission, at least in part, if it hadn't been for Radio Canada's investigation with the show Enquête, for example. We wouldn't have a cleanup in Laval. I'm not saying the CBC and Radio Canada
Wait,
did
they
it all by
can't do that
themselves.
if they're private?
I think that this is a good investment because they do stuff that private broadcasters won't do or won't spend the money on. It's expensive to do investigative journalism and documentaries and blah, blah, blah. And if you read the mandate, they are supposed to produce Canadian content, reflect Canada's multicultural makeup, broadcast in both official languages, and be accessible all over the country. That's expensive. And they're being slowly cut back. They just laid off 60 technicians, like last week. They laid off all of their makeup artists. The place is half empty now. So what are we accomplishing by doing that? We're pushing the CBC out into the private sphere to take advertising away from private broadcasters. So either you fund it properly,
they could have kept...
or you say, okay, we're letting it go. But don't do this half measures thing, which is what's happening. They're starving it to death. It's the death of the thousand cuts.
Well, maybe they could have kept a lot of those people they let go if they weren't competing with private broadcasters to buy American television. That's not part of their mandate.
No, it's not, but it's what they do to try and make money because they're stuck. They haven't got enough funding to do what their mandate tells them to do. And as for the name change, part of the problem is a language thing. CBC is a very recognizable, easily remembered acronym, right? In French, it's radio, when in fact it's television, it's the web, it's blogging, it's all kinds of stuff. So radio was the main problem. I don't think Canada was the problem. And what they'll be doing is saying, Ici, Radio Canada.
No, they won't. No.
Apparently,
no, absolutely
not. They're keeping
not.
the pizza. They're keeping the CBC logo on all of their material, if you'll notice.
The newscasters have been told explicitly not to say Ici, Radio Canada. Radio Canada is out. It's Ici.
Well, it'll exist in an ethereal way.
Yeah. Trudy?
I also think that without the Canada beside the logo, no one will know what the logo stands for.
No, everybody knows what it's the most recognizable logo in Canada, right up there with McDonald's.
Yeah, but for how long? For how long?
It's Trudy's turn now.
Once it's gone. Once the Radio Canada disappears, the Canada part, how long will people continue to recognize that for what it is? I have some sympathy with taking the radio out of the identifier for the television operations. I understand that completely. It is confusing, I think, to a lot of people. But here in Quebec, I cannot. My knee-jerk reaction, I will admit it, was, well, that's another representation of the federal government that's being wiped off the map here in Quebec. And we know that there are some very staunch sovereignists within Radio Canada who are probably dancing in the corridors of the building today because of this change. It wipes the federal government's presence, a visible representation of the federal government off the map here in Quebec, and I think they're very, very pleased about that.
Yeah, I have to wonder just exactly how deep this decision goes. I mean, it's not unusual for broadcast outlets to change their name, to change their nicknames, to go from one moniker to the next. Is that what this is all about? I don't know. I wasn't in the back rooms of Radio Canada when this decision was made. What I found very interesting, and I certainly can't take credit for this, it's a tweet from Andrew Coyne from the National Post that just moments ago. Andrew tweets, "The best part is that the scrubbing of any mention of Canada from the French CBC's branding will be paid for out of public funds." So I thought that was ironic indeed. But yes, I mean, from my perspective, it looks like Radio Canada, as we know it, is gone as far as a name is concerned. But Marc Bichette is the public relations director at Radio Canada, says Radio Canada exists and will always exist. In what way, shape, or form, I'm not completely clear at this point. But I'm a bit of a traditional guy, and I'm sorry to see the name go.
Lots of fascinating texts coming in. Mark says, in the age of 600 channels and the internet, CBC is an anachronism. Enough already. And Donnie says, the public does not belong in journalism. Independence is key. How can you be independent towards someone that funds your operation? How can they justify spending hundreds of millions of dollars of public money bidding on the Olympics? That coverage would still be there, would be on a private broadcaster, because the CBC outbids the private broadcasters in order to do it, much to the delight of the Olympic Committee. And someone else suggesting you don't like radio, call it Tele-Canada. But they didn't want to do that because the major issue was why do you see so many ads? You see so many ads where they have the word Canada in the rest of the country, and in Quebec the same company takes out the word Canada, puts something else in. Because it's not a good brand in this country. But this organization, funded by taxpayers from all over Canada, should not have the name Canada erased.
Well, that speaks a little bit to what, Trudy, you were saying before, and I had that similar initial reaction in terms of, Canada has gone from Radio Canada.
Lots of interesting texts coming in right now. This one says, does anyone have the power to make the word be put back into the name? I don't know if the government does or if it plans to interfere in that way or not. 514-790-0991. Professor Velk on the line. Good morning. You're on CJD.
Good morning. You know, that gigantic tombstone of a building, a monument to yesterday's socialism, is completely unnecessary in the first place. Today's electronic universe makes every kind of entertainment possible available to every Eskimo and every penguin, whether you're at one pole of the earth or another. We don't need taxpayers to produce. Ironically, kitty corner, of course, from that tombstone are CTV and you guys, and you have anywhere from 2 times to 10 times the viewers for any particular kind of show.
Yeah, but
and of course, your costs are proportionately less.
Yes, but look at this question we just got, Professor Velk. It says, would private media like CTV or Astral do reporting on media concentration, legal telecom cartels, or unfair pharmaceutical patents?
Well, absolutely they would do it, and they wouldn't do it with the left-wing bias that the CBC displays, and, of course, the linguistic bigotry. I mean, you go into that building, it's a federal operation, of course. English is supposed to be every bit as prevalent as is French, and especially the techies as I'm certainly you know, if you're in there working out, as I am once in a while, they have what I would call snarling French. If you dare to talk to the non-on-air people using the English language. I mean, this aggressive use of work only in French, according to the Quebec model, is supposed to be not operational in a federally financed operation.
All right, thank you, Professor Velk. This is very interesting, and I'd like to go around the table to get reaction on this text. It says, Tommy's right in calling what it is, the state broadcaster, as opposed to a public one like PBS, whose viewers and supporters have very direct control over programming. And I won't forget the CBC's dedicated U.S. bashing town hall program aired after 9/11, before the victims were even cold. And what is interesting about that, I remember that show very well. And that's from Mario. It went on for 2 hours, and every single person in the town hall said it was the fault of the U.S. and they had it coming. Now, I understand one or two people would think that. Everybody, for the 2 hour period. Actually, I stopped after about an hour and 15 minutes of it. And to the point, it was so biased that after that, the CBC made a decision that it would not do its own finding of audiences. They outsourced it to an independent company to find audiences for a town hall because the bias was so obvious.
I think what happened in that case was some junior people booked audiences. You know, the first come, first serve. They didn't do a proper sort. I mean, all kinds of broadcasters make programming mistakes. If you look to Europe, for example, where, for example, the BBC, which is the model for the CBC, was created, I think the CBC does fairly respectably, despite the problems that it faces. And I don't know about you, if you listen to PBS or NPR, these constant fundraising drives and constant solicitations for weeks on end, I'm not sure whether that's a formula that we need to think about, but maybe that's the debate we need to have. My sense is that this outfit, which Velk basically just slagged relentlessly, which also pays him sometimes because he goes in, I'm sure he's paid a per diem or a stipend or something. I think it's worth protecting, and I think it's a great training ground, and I think it's made huge contributions to the cultural life of the country on all kinds of levels, which are incalculably valuable.
I also think you have to understand that the CBC is not the only media organization that has been accused of having an institutional bias within the news programming. And a lot of news outlets struggle with this, and I think it's more a function of the political beliefs of the type of people who tend to become journalists. And I'm not talking about commentators here who are paid to have an opinion. I'm talking about journalists, and it's one of the things that they try and deal with a little bit in J School, because I think journalists, I don't want to make them sound like a monolith, a group that everyone has the same views, but I think journalists in general tend to skew a little bit left of center here in Canada. And so a lot of media organizations grapple with this. And although that town hall absolutely, I think, was a mistake, Tommy, I think someone made a very, very bad call in terms of the audience for that.
I mean, journalists strive for objectivity, but at the same time, to a great degree, we are in a subjective business because we are making decisions every day with respect to just different things. And as people, we come into certain situations with different opinions. I mean, you can't help that. How it translates onto the air, i.e. the town hall, that's one thing. But, at the end of the day, we're all people, and we're not the same person.
Right now, we're talking about the CBC and EC, the new name for Reggio Canada. What do you think? Joe says, bring back Reach for the Top. Trudy, you're
like
talking
20 years gone now.
You're talking about journalists as opposed to commentators who are paid for an opinion. Journalists are supposed to be neutral, like anchors. News anchors are very much supposed to be neutral on the news. In other words, you're not supposed to know what they think about the news story. Is that correct?
I would say that's probably fair. And also, you have to take into account they're not generally doing the reporting unless you have an anchor who's actually out on the scene covering stuff. They're not as well informed as reporters are.
So you're not supposed to know what their political views are. Remember Dan Rather? Did we have an idea of what his views were on George Bush? Peter Mansbridge, do we have an idea of what his views are on Stephen Harper?
Yeah,
I think it's kind of crystal clear. Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes you can pick it up from a line of questioning during an interview, a live interview, but generally, no, you're not supposed to. have an idea.
Yeah, you're not supposed to, but we do. This one says, it's no job on Canadians, no doubt maneuvering by the separatists. They say it's because of broad spectrum of broadcasting. They should have called it Ici Canada. I think it has to do with removing the word Canada, just like many private companies in Quebec do it, for marketing reasons.
This is the Tommy Schnurmacher Podcast. Listen to the show live, weekdays 9 to noon on CJAD 800.
Could anyone have predicted what's going on in Turkey right now? Yes, and he's on the line right now. It's been far too long since Trends forecaster Gerald Celente was on the show. I'm itching to find out what his take is on the latest nation to rebel against government. We'll find out what's up with gold prices, what's up with youth unemployment, the stock market. Is it about to get bearish like a grumpy old grizzly? Gerald, the publisher of the TrendsJournal, and he joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning, Tommy.
Gerald, is this the extension of what's happening in Turkey day after day after day? Is this an extension of the Arab Spring?
It's part of it. I think it's a little more complicated than that, and it's very hard, actually, Tommy, to get a lot of information out on it, particularly if you live in Turkey. You know, CNN, at the height of this revolts going on, the protests, were airing a documentary on penguins. I mean, that's to show you how the news really coming from there is very hard to get. So mostly what I'm seeing is the same story, and it's from three elements. One is that the gap between the rich and the poor has widened. By the way, Turkey is the third widest gap between rich and poor in the OECD. They rank just behind Mexico, and the United States is the worst. The second thing is that these Islamic push by the prime minister, they just banned alcohol, for example, or attempting to ban elements of it. And they just named a bridge they're putting up over an Ottoman sultan of the 16th century who massacred tens of thousands of Alevi minority, and they make up about 20% of the population. And then the third point is serious support of NATO and the Arab League in the overthrow of Assad in Syria. Assad has a lot of supporters in that area, and they see it, a lot of the people in Turkey, again, from the information that I'm reading and gleaning throughout the world, is that they see this as a Islamic Al-Qaeda radical movement to overthrow Assad, and they don't want Turkey going in that direction, and they feel it is, again, because of the Islamic laws on the stricter side that are being imposed by the Prime Minister Erdogan.
Now, you think it's going to whip out? Is it going to continue? We've had apologies from the government to some extent. Sorry, what we did in the streets. Is it going to die down, or is it going to build in Turkey?
You know, I don't know. I don't know. But it's interesting when you hear what Erdogan said in making a case to overthrow Assad in Syria. He said, quote, "A leader who kills his own people has lost his legitimacy." So far, there have been several protesters have been killed in Turkey, and some 3,000 arrested, and another 3,000 or 4,000 injured. But also, this is expanding around the country. So I don't think it's going to die down. If it does, it'll only be temporary. Because at the bottom of these things, mostly when you look at them, my saying, when people lose everything and have nothing left to lose, they lose it. And a lot of people are losing their income. As I said, the gap between the rich and the poor is very wide, and this recovery that's happened in Turkey, most of the money, as happens in these kind of boom recoveries, has gone to a very few. And of course, the issue about the shopping center, that they were going to build in that park is another one. But the element of that shopping center is that it is going to enrich the rich, and that's why, that's what the protests are about. So I think it's going to continue. Whether it will spark right now and continue to blow up, I don't know.
Your questions for Trends analyst, TrendsJournal publisher Gerald Celente, 514-790-0991. Text your question or your comment to 514-800. It's quite a different situation. In Iran, there was a green revolution that came and went. People tried to get rid of that government. That didn't work at all. Why is it so different with the regime in Iran?
Oh, because the Iranian regime, I mean, just think of you're an Iranian, and right now your currency isn't worth anything. You're suffering from the sanctions being imposed upon you by the United States, NATO, and other countries. And it's very easy to rally a large group of people when you have a common enemy. You know, fear and hysteria is a very powerful tool, and in their case, it's very real as well. So, as a matter of fact, in the new elections right now, the guy running for president is very anti-American. And I'm not talking about Ahmadinejad, the other fellow running. And so it's a galvanizing force. So that's why a moderate force right now in a country that is reeling from economic pressures is not going to win. You go to the one that's going to say they're going to fight back the hardest.
Gerald, lately when I've been picking up any paper from Europe and reading one article after another about youth unemployment at 40%, 45% in places like Italy and Portugal, and then in Greece something catastrophic like 62%. I said, wait a second, I'm getting a sense of déjà vu. Gerald Celente told me about this ages ago. Where is this heading when you have so many young people unemployed in Europe?
This is where the civil wars take place. I mean, we wrote about this as you mentioned. You know, it's back in I believe it was 2011 TrendsJournal, the top trends of 2011, Youth of the World Unite, and again, you know, you think about it. You know, they're angry, they're young, their hormones are raging, and they're raging mad, and they feel that they've been jabbed by the establishment. So these are the people that are willing to put their necks on the line, lives on the line. Oh, this is very important, by the way. You asked me where it's going to go in Turkey. To me, the model that shows where it works and how it works is the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall came down after people went out and protested and didn't go home. And they stayed and stayed until the wall came down. The same thing could happen in Turkey. If this remains a peaceful protest, they can have some positive elements. But here's the downside to it. With Berlin, it was very easy bringing down the Communist Party, and the alternative was a lot better. In Turkey, and the same thing that happened in Egypt, there was no alternative to take its place. So that's why when these kind of protests happen, as you see in Turkey, it's not going to be a happy ending when there's nothing in place to take its place.
So what'll happen? I mean, who will fill the vacuum?
Exactly. Right now, there's no place there. There's no party in place or movement in place to fill the vacuum, so it becomes more destabilization. But going back to the youth, it's not only going to be in Europe, it's going to be in the United States as well. You know, this is a criminal operation. I want to make this really clear. We were all kids. You know, I know everybody out there has kids that are 17, 18, and 19 years old that are amazing and special. You know, but just take hold of yourself. They're not that amazing and special. They're kids. So they decide in the United States they're going to go to college. And they got to come up with, about $40,000 a year, $50,000 a year, $27,000 a year to go to school. Now, where are they going to get the dough? Don't worry about it. Have your parents sign on the dotted line. And then if your parents can't sign on the dotted line, have grandma and grandpa sign on the dotted line. And you're going to have to pay back this money. So now these kids are going to school. They have over $1 trillion worth of debt. And the parents and grandparents are responsible for it. And if they die and they don't have the dough, the kids are indentured servants. They're obligated to pay. You don't get off. You don't get off this hook. They take it out of your pay if you ever get a job.
Your questions for TrendsJournal publisher Gerald Celente. Gerald, this question for you. Does Gerald know about the Bilderberg Group?
Oh, of course. Matter of fact, I learned about that. God, it had to be back in about 1985. There was this paper, Liberty something, that an attorney friend of mine started showing me. And I never... Liberty Lobby, I think that was it. And is there a Illuminati group that is are telling the people giving the orders to the politicians. I don't think it's an Illuminati group, because if they were Illuminati, they have the un-Illuminati carrying out the orders when you look at these people. But no, there's definitely, it's real. It was established after World War II in Bilderberg, I think it was in the Netherlands, and it's an annual meeting of the movers and shakers, both in the financial world, the political world, and the media world. And it's very secretive, yes.
All right, Mike on the line from TMR. Good morning.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you guys, what are the political and economic reasons for the Americans supporting the Syrian rebels, who are just a bunch of violent jihadists and will destroy the country and make it into a theocracy dedicated to hating democracy and all things American? So, why bother?
Because, first of all, how about Kim Kardashian? What is that? How about that baby? I mean, they don't know what's going on, and again, they use fear and hysteria. We're gonna bring democracy and freedom to Iraq and Afghanistan. How about those weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al Qaeda? Why? Listen to what General Dwight D. Eisenhower said, 5-star general, supreme commander of the Allied forces, and 2-term president, and a Republican at that. When he leaves office, he warns the people that the military-industrial complex is robbing the nation of the genius of the scientists, the sweat of its labors, and the future of the children. Do you realize that the Afghan and Iraq wars are going to cost the United States $6 trillion? War is a racket. Major General, what was it, Bradley, Smedley Bradley or something like that, the most highest decorated Marine general in the United States before World War II, Smedley Butler, that was it. No, it's a racket. So they're taking the people to war. It's their business. There's two groups running the show, the money mafia and the military mafia.
There's two texts here for you. One says, "Hi, Tom. I love Gerald. I'd love to have coffee with him, talk issues with him. He's the coolest guy around." And this other text says, "Didn't Gerald predict gold would go through the roof?"
Yes, I did. And I predicted that gold would reach $2,000 an ounce. And it nearly did. It was in the high 1900s. And now it's backed off. And I'm in it for the long term. And something very interesting going on. People should be very aware of this. Go out and try to buy physical gold. There's shortages of it all over. And if you buy it, it's going to be at a very high premium. They're shorting it on the paper markets. It's not in the interest of the central banks for gold prices to go high. I mean, look what's going on. Here they have dumped in, this is reported, by the way, $7 trillion since the Panic of '08 began, the central banks, in trying to juice the global economy. And it hasn't worked. Look at the equity markets now going around the world. The Dow, by the way, everybody's bragging. Oh, the stock market, now it's below 15,000, is above 15,000. Well, it hit 14,000 in October of 2007. Accounting for inflation, just to be back at that level right now, and that's 3% inflation a year, the Dow should be at about 15,700. And gold, by the way, back then, when the Dow was at 14,000, was at 750. And as we speak, it's still $1,400 an ounce. So I'm in gold for the long term, because all they're doing is printing all of this digital money. Oh, and the other thing, housing recovery. Yeah. We have interest rates at record lows. People are being forced to play in the equity markets because they used that quaint old thing they used to have one time, Tommy, when we were young, savings. You put your money in the bank and then you get interest on it. That doesn't exist anymore. So even with record low interest rates, at best we have a tepid recovery. If they raise interest rates and stop stimulus, this economy goes back down into panic mode. And I believe they're going to attempt to raise interest rates. Already mortgage rates are going up. And when they go up, things are going to slow down, and then you're going to see a spate of quantitative easing that is going to again drive gold prices much higher.
Listen to the Tommy Schnurmacher Show live weekdays 9 to noon on CJAD 800 and CJAD.com. .com.